My name is Emrys Schoemaker. I'm at the Global Governance Centre here at the Graduate Institute with Sylvia, who's made all of today possible. So thank you, Sylvia, in advance. So, why are we doing this? I mean, Tim and colleagues will go into more depth about some of the thinking and the plans, but to set a bit of context, there seems to be a moment right now in terms of the various processes around AI governance that are really significant, and that there is a moment now where there's an opportunity to feed into those and perhaps try and contribute some perspectives that may well be missing. I think are missing from many of those debates. There's the Global AI Dialogue, which will take place in July, just before the AI for Good Summit, again here in Geneva. Then Switzerland is hosting the AI Summit next year, again here in Geneva. And I think, you know, this kind of trajectory, they're both very different processes. The Global AI Dialogue is very much a UN-based process linked to the Global Digital Compact, feeding into that multilateral process. The AI Summit is much more of an, it's multilateral, but it's not within the UN system, so it's outside. So there's these two touch points that I think are quite meaningful and represent an opportunity, but in very different spaces. Personally, I'm a really strong believer in the importance of multi-stakeholder engagement, multi-stakeholder governance in general. I work on this in a number of different contexts. And looking back, I think there's a lot of history that we can learn from for the importance of it, and where not taking multi-stakeholder approaches has led to real costs. I spent a lot of time looking at the New World Information Communication Order, which took place during the 70s and the 80s, and there was linked to the non-aligned movement, the Cold War, and so on, but there was debate around satellite broadcasting. Similar concerns around sovereignty, around territorial control, around cultural protections, many of the similar concerns that we see in debates around AI governance and so on. That led to the US withdrawing from UNESCO. It led to actually a failure to really protect certainly state interests around borders and so on. One of the reasons, I think, one of the characteristics of that process, that debate, and part of its failure was the fact that it was actually quite a narrow coalition, purely states. There were no citizens' perspectives engaged in some of those discussions in the debates that took place. So I think with this current AI moment, if you like, there's an opportunity to really kind of try and address what was missing in the past and bring in different perspectives and look for opportunities for those perspectives to have influence over different policy processes. All of which is to say, I think there's a real moment now. And I'm excited to hear from this discussion where this might go and how we might feed into some of these processes, the two ones that are there. I've got a lot more to say, but mindful very much of time. So I'm going to hand over to Tim and then open up for discussion.
Wonderful. So we have three kind of presentation inputs for you to just share and set the scene for some of the work we've been developing around how to take advantage of that moment. So I'm going to share with you a bit of the story of how we got here from the work I've been doing at Connected by Data. We'll hear from Octavia on what's the field out there of existing participatory practice, and then Johnny, fresh from running the Global Citizens Assembly on climate, some of the learning from that process that we can transfer into thinking about the AI domain. So we're each getting through what could be individually hours of presentations in sort of 6 or 7 minutes each. So forgive us for doing that. We will share links, notes afterwards. So I work, my name is Tim Davies. I work at Connected by Data, which is a UK campaign for communities to have a powerful voice in the governance of data and AI. And we've got here through weaving together many different threads. And obviously there are many other threads, much longer histories, as Emrys has said, of work in this space that I won't fully touch on here, but want to really acknowledge that this builds on many people's work. But the recent story that brings us here started at the AI Safety Summit that was called in 2023 by the then UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak at Bletchley Park, invite-only event of states and companies and civil society. Few representatives made it in. What we did alongside that was put together a people's panel on AI, a sortition selected citizens jury, as it were, this group you can see here, to carry out a deliberative review of that process. So from the outside to look in and say, from everything we're hearing from the debates around this event, are citizen interests and voices being represented? And they came up with a number of recommendations, came up with this diagram you can see of showing how citizens can be a key bridge point between all the different stakeholder interests and people often talking across each other. When they talk to what's this mean for people, those conversations connect. But they also made two key recommendations. They said we need global governance of AI and we need sustained and inclusive ongoing public dialogue. So that set us a challenge of how do we explore that more. And we then worked with the ISWE Foundation and a number of others to say, what would it look like? What are the different models that could exist for citizen deliberation at the global level on AI governance? And we looked at that has to answer a number of questions. It has to think about what's it focusing on values and vision, governance, regulation, or the detailed implementation. It has to work out where it docks. There's no point in having vast public participatory conversations with no root to power. We need these things to be powerful, to have a place that they dock, that they connect in, and a strategy for action and influence. And we need to think about the many different models there are, from transnational dialogue to using modern digital platforms to bring together many voices, to embedding conversations on AI governance in other processes. And in that work, we really uncovered just the breadth of practice that is already out there. Work of Missions Publiques on We the Internet, the Collective Intelligence Project, Science-Wise, global assemblies, firms running processes, governments running processes such as the Belgian Citizens Panel on AI during their EU presidency, a kind of flourishing of practice, but again, quite disconnected, no continuity to that, bringing it together into that larger story. So to explore that, we then brought together at the 2025 AI Action Summit in Paris, and just recently in India, the Participatory AI Research and Practice Symposium, with hundreds of people sharing cases from right across the globe, showing where people are thinking deeply about how do we have informed public engagement on AI topics. And we did that because we recognised back in 2024 the political will for creating new citizen participation mechanisms at the global level was not there, and there wasn't that moment to dock into something to connect this somewhere. But when we were meeting in India, there was clearly that maturing of the field, that sense that we are at that stage of we can bring together this disparate work, and we start to have places that this work could go and dock. And so that gives us two questions we're exploring, really. One is, how can we foster an inclusive and broad citizens track that builds public voice into the governance of AI at all levels? And taking advantage of this particular moment of opportunity, how can we bring inclusive public dialogue into the UN Global Dialogue on AI governance and into future AI summits? So before I go to our other speakers to kind of give us some of the ingredients of answering that question, I just want to define a few key bits. This may be familiar to everyone already, but I think it's useful just to state. When we say public dialogue, we're talking about a structured process that builds inclusive capacity, that gives diverse communities an opportunity to understand AI, its implications, and different points of view on AI futures, that enables those communities, those groups coming together to make informed choices about AI adoption, about accountable approaches to safe, secure, and trustworthy AI, and that secures public support for governance action to bring together both expert input and lived experience through collective deliberation. And dialogue takes many forms, but what differentiates it from, say, consultation or opinion polling or other surveys of public input, which we've had vast UN surveys in the past into the SDGs, into other processes, is that there's an intentional recruitment of who's engaged. There's a learning phase of saying we're going to give people access to balanced, expert, informed inputs. There's a deliberation phase that gives people a chance not just to reflect their gut reaction, but to really think and develop their views. And then there is some action out of that process, whether that's feeding into product decisions, policy, or participant empowerment for the future. And those two processes that have been mentioned, the Global Dialogue on AI Governance will have its first iteration in July this year in the margins of AI Field-Reid and WSIS meetings, currently specified as 2 days with 4 thematic sessions, a scientific report, and being framed as a dialogue of dialogues. It's actively being kind of designed right now. In fact, there's consultations this afternoon that the co-chairs are running that we and others have been feeding into. But it will be a key moment of developing a new institution of governance. And then the AI Summit, as Emrys said, is a slightly different process outside that UN system, but will be here Q2 in 2027, part of, I think, Swiss leadership on global AI governance. It's a series that's been evolving. The first one was a safety forum or safety summit, then an action summit, an impact summit. I don't know if the Swiss one has a subtitle yet.
We'll talk about that.
Excellent, we can answer that in a bit. And then there's a whole Road to Geneva program of pre-events.
Yeah,
and
for
so
citizen summit. Not yet.
Next time.
And so I'm going to hand to our others now, and then just before we go to the discussion, I'll recap the three key opportunities we see, which are at particularly this July, but also next year, to showcase public voice, to connect these processes with existing distributed dialogue, but also to embed an ambitious vision of our public deliberation at the heart of these processes. With that, I will hand to Octavia.
Thank you so much, Tim. And can I say I'm just really delighted to be here and conversations with you all about how we're going to develop these ideas. I'm Octavia Field-Reid. I work at the Lovelace Institute, which is an independent research institute. We're based in London and Brussels. We're increasingly seeing the centre of conversations moving to these global governance conversations, so it's really important to be here. I'm going to talk a bit about making public voice visible. I'm not sure how to move the slides on.
Look at me with the eyes.
Well, that works so well. So I'm going to talk a bit about making public voice visible. As we've heard, there's a sort of natural synergy between AI and public voice. Public really want their hopes, concerns, experiences, expectations to be listened to. We hear that in all of the deliberative work that we do. And those developing AI and AI policy also really need public trust to secure that legitimacy for future developments. So these two things need to happen. There's just 2 points to really pull out, I think. There's a tendency to think about public views as a hurdle or barrier in policy circles. We must see them as an enabler towards distributing the benefits of AI equitably. That has to happen. And also policymakers should really care about public trust, because without that trust, we see the backlashes and barriers to AI innovations that everybody wants to avoid. We've seen this in protests around data centres in the UK, with public refusal to trust sharing of GP and NHS data, which is getting in the way of health development everywhere. So there's lots of good reasons to do this. So I'm going to talk about two things. We've been talking a lot about this sort of missing bridge. So we know that there's lots of work going on in the participatory world. We know that policymakers want to move forward with public legitimacy, but somehow those two things are not joining up. And really what happens in the middle of there is what I'm today. So fortunately, on the left-hand side, there's a lot of work being done across the globe on collecting evidence on AI benefits and harms with people's hopes and concerns. There's lots of work on how to build specific mechanisms to hear and understand public views, and they include local deliberative projects. As Tim said, I am whistling through this, so we will send you on some notes on this afterwards and some references. Tim talked about the People's Panel on AI Summit as a local deliberative project. Pairs that Tim also mentioned, there's a Public Voices programme which was hosted at Sheffield University, showcases lots of examples of these. Citizens' assemblies, Johnny is going to talk about Global Citizens' Assembly on Climate, inclusive public attitude surveys. We're thinking a lot about participatory methods here, but obviously the quantitative methods have a huge role to play, as do digital platforms. And then the evidence reviews that are happening that really synthesise and look across, enable us to sort of assess the quality and inclusiveness of evidence. And that really helps us both to hear what people are saying, but also to think about gaps that need to be filled. So on the right-hand side, we can see more this sort of building participatory methods into processes and institutions. I think it's fair to say that we don't quite know how to do that now. We've got lots of participatory mechanisms. We're developing a will for that to happen, and there's a space in the middle that is really what we're trying to fill. International events like the AI summits in UK, Paris, Delhi, we're seeing that civil society and public voices are still left out of conversations, or if they're included, they're not given the airspace that the more powerful voices occupy. And that's still happening. Tim and I were in Delhi, and I'm afraid we saw that firsthand. That even at an AI summit located in the Global South, public and civil society voices from the Global South And, you know, remember this represents 88% of the world's population. We're still marginalised, and digital products were still being shaped by the priorities of the global north, which controls the critical resources and data. So there's definitely work to do here, and we really see the global dialogue as a place where that can happen. I had a bit more to say.
Oh, sorry.
But that's okay. I just wanted to touch on the pairs research for a second, because it was really important that that was there in India, and we think it's really important that it's there in this. It brings forward the evidence of experiences, particularly for the global south, but it also offers sort of models, but also critical analysis at scale that challenge this sort of dominant epistemic and technical approaches, which otherwise are the only thing that we hear. So we see four opportunities arising from this public voice research. One is to build the evidence base on public experience and expectations. The second is to resist the governance processes that exclude civil society, to make experiences of AI risks and harms visible, and really to ensure people affected by AI have meaningful input into governance. And these are the things that we really want to have. If we can build space for these things to happen, then we can really move forwards inclusively. So what next? You know, these are the questions that Tim was asking, but how do we get to the place where people's expectations to be meaningfully consulted is realised? We know that the participatory work is there. We know that the need for policy and practice is there, and the bridge is kind of missing. We do see the global dialogue as a place where this sort of institution building for global AI will be explored, and having this bridge in place feels really critical for that to happen. So we see the UN Global Dialogue as a uniquely inclusive forum, an opportunity to put existing evidence of hopes, concerns, experiences, expectations on the record, and also a place to raise questions or themes for future public dialogues. There's a continuity of work that needs to happen here as well. And if that is to happen meaningfully, we do need to hear from debates and contexts around the world. So thank you very much.
Straight to John.
Okay, thanks, Octavia. Yeah, so I work for ISWE Foundation. We sort of generally innovating around the governance space, but one of our big project is the Global Citizens Assembly, which we have been building up around the climate space initially, and hopefully moving into other global topics such as AI. So hopefully some of the experience here is relevant. When you're, so what do you do with the Global Citizens Assembly on climate? Well, there's a long-established process for how this works at the international and multilateral level. There are these key moments in the year. So you have the COP in November, you have Bonn in June, you have various climate weeks happening throughout in between those two. So if you're going to run a citizens assembly, quite a good time to do it is in between the COP and the Bonn, so you can have time to make a report to get into the agendas for the following COP. However, that's 105 people this year, and that's sortation selected. It follows all the citizens assembly rules, but also it's nice to be able to expand that participation and to have it more grounded in local realities. So for that reason, we have a continuous track of what we call community assemblies, which you can think of as heterogeneous deliberative spaces. Might be a better name, but that's more catchy. And that means that you've kind of got a constant stream of the ability to synthesize the outputs from many community assemblies. These are self-run things. Explain a bit more later. But it gives you two key reporting moments and sort of a constant flow of the agendas. The outputs from community assemblies can feed the agendas of civic assemblies and vice versa. Just briefly on what it takes to run a big global citizens assembly like that. It's about a year end to end from planning to finishing. The main execution takes place over about 6 months. We run for the sortation, we run 2 stages. We do a location lottery that happened in September. Then we partner organizations at all of those locations. They recruit potential participants, and then we run the demographic selection in just before the assembly begins to demographically select the people from that pool. Those people deliberate for 42 hours over 2 months. Just finished about a month ago, and then we move on to the impact stage. Touching very briefly on the types of outputs we get, we did the kind of traditional thing where you get expert input, but we really focused it onto the dilemma points within the food systems and climate topic, and we were able to get these quantitative results from the assembly members on this, and then but to accompany that, we also did a more open-ended thing to really get some agendas from the ground up from the assembly members, and so we got some themes, and then next slide we were able to create a sort of pluralistic vision statement that, without trying to force consensus, there's some natural consensus that emerges, so that's what most of us want to see. There's some areas of contention, and then the areas that people generally wanted to avoid. So that's one of the expressions of the outputs, and these combined together give you a whole list of, after a few more stages of several sessions of deliberation, gives you the calls to action, or you can think of as the recommendations that can be voted on, and in this particular case, we got pretty good support from all the assembly members on these. Moving on to the community assemblies, yeah, like I said, the idea is, it's grounded in local realities. So we really try not to be too instructive about what to do, but we try to provide guidance on how to build your own contextually appropriate deliberative space that will help to create local impact, but also adds up through aggregation to some expression of global voice. But it's so you can think of it as like a deliberative survey in a way, but the important fact is that it is deliberative. So there's the scaling element of this. We're working with partners to get up to a target of about 5,000 by the end of this year. Then it's really about building deliberative infrastructure throughout the world, and that infrastructure is like the skills and the facilitation skills, design skills, and creation of local impact networks, and exercising these deliberative muscles, so they can be applied to. And then we have a digital platform in development that is a vehicle for this guidance. Will perform the aggregation, connects people within the network, and is ideally interoperable with other processes and participation from other places around the world. So all this adds up to a kind of a local to global governance, deliberative governance infrastructure, through which we can take the outputs from civic assemblies, from community assemblies, from other processes, and express those in ways that specific audiences, important audiences, can take in and use. So we currently have some influential people in the UN climate space reviewing the outputs of the Civic Assembly that have been synthesized with a whole range of previous climate processes across all scales. And that helped us to tune the messaging at the Boston conference in June. But there's also a need to look into all the local impacts within like the different sort of sectoral groups, for example, within food systems and climate. So there's work to do there. And then, the press, academia, and public will require slightly different ways to receive this information. And the ultimate goal is to have a sort of self-service data platform, which can allow people to sort of, see things in ways that suit them. The impact metrics we have are based around these 5 areas. So the top 2 about action. So institutional action is quite clear, and then citizen action is that's to make sure that it stays local, and understanding that sort of building of self-efficacy and seeing what's actually happening on the ground. Because sometimes what you do actually says more about what you think than what you say you think. Solidarity is a really important metric of a deliberative processes working. It's one of the great things that makes them different from anything else. So we have metrics for that. Learning happens, both people in assemblies learn, but the world learns from all these assemblies. And you know, the inclusion aspect, you know, that Octavia sort of mentioned this, and it's just making sure that we are that you are the unheard are being heard, and it's a truly inclusive process. We can probably skip the next one. It's just another expression of that. The lessons, the harder lessons we've learned so far, you know, this particular process, this sort of docking that we've done, seems to be working for climate. But you know, that's a 30-year-old state-driven thing compared to the AI, which is new, maybe a bit more company-driven. So there's challenges and opportunities around that, but one size definitely doesn't fit all. We spent, you know, 2 years making very good friends with COP presidents, and yeah, getting put into spaces we wouldn't normally have been in, but the support is maybe not quite what we thought it was going to be. So we don't know if this has worked yet. It's, you know, we're still making it. And then, you know, the other funny thing is that, you know, no matter how much you talk about solidarity building, why deep conversations are different and sometimes better than surveys, some people never understand that. Some people always think experts know best, and you know, these metrics of like solidarity and inclusion are not necessarily always appreciated. But I think maybe it just needs to be socialized more.
Fantastic. So there is a wealth of learning, a wealth of content. I'm going to try and speak slightly slower just for this bit, introducing the 3 spaces that we've then taken all of that and taken a number of engagements with wider community, with all those people that are pioneers, with the webinar we had at our online meeting a few weeks ago, with lots of conversations around the UN Global Dialogue. I think really practically, with an event in just over 2 months, and then a summit in just over a year. As Johnny said, a big assembly takes a long time to do. What should we pragmatically and practically seek to do to have a citizens track in AI governance? And we've got 3 parts that we're kind of exploring with you now. The first is to say we need to showcase existing public voice. It is so easy, as Octavia mentioned, to have summits and events on AI that mention impacts on publics, but you just don't see it. What you see are the shiny demos or the tech platforms, but not the voice of people affected. And yet we have a wealth of this from across the world. So we're envisioning for the global dialogue that there should be a casebook of those existing findings from recent public dialogue that can be explored by the methods, the funding, the governance. A showcase of selected findings, ideally alongside that global dialogue at Palexpo, and a platform that facilitates ways for informed public participants to join the dialogue. So one of the things that happens when you get people involved in these public participation opportunities is they want to stay involved. They are now informed participants, they've thought critically about AI, and they're ready to get involved in more governance. The group we had for that People's Panel on AI in 2023, we still work with some of them. They still kind of want to get involved and shape what's happening and bring their voice from their community into conversations. How can we facilitate that around these events? Secondly, how can we connect what's happening at the global level with these distributed dialogues that have already taken place, and catalyse and support new groups to host deliberation on global dialogue themes, particularly informed by doing that casebook mapping to say where are the gaps, which communities aren't currently having these conversations, doing that. So that might be just taking the global dialogue themes and outcomes and turning those into accessible briefing materials that can be used in local conversations. It might be saying, how can we live link up citizens' assemblies and dialogues that are taking place in July this year to the experts who are present there in Geneva? And the great thing also in public dialogue around expert citizen conversations is they're a two-way conversation. They're presented as the experts sitting on the panel and talking, but the questions they get asked, the feedback they get, the responses from publics in that moment shape some of their thinking about what is it we're doing here. And we really saw that in 2023, where some of the experts we brought in early in the process reflected on how talking with citizens affected the way they engage with the rest of the events around them, that kind of burst the bubble of being in the sort of expert space of this that gets quite quickly disconnected from the lived reality. And we also think about this key challenge for both the global dialogue and the AI summits of the continuity platform. How do we have continuity between events where we've got recommendations being made, or we've got commitments being made, or we've got actions? But as Johnny mentioned, those platforms that can keep connections between deliberations over time and feed back into the later sessions. And then lastly, the really ambitious piece of how do we say, in a new set of institutions of AI governance, not a 30-year-old set of institutions, but in new institutions, can we be ambitious about embedding public deliberation as a core part? So the global dialogue has a scientific report and a dialogue, but where's the citizen assembly or the citizen track as a thing that owns and says we are having coordinated, distributed dialogues, but also a transnational civic assembly that is delivering recommendations into the decision-making process, docking into these events. So those are the kind of three things we're exploring right now. We are feeding some of that in next week to the written consultation of the global dialogue, but then also working on a white paper to present in July as well. And so the discussions, hopefully we can now open up to, can really inform some of that. And we kind of want your thoughts on how we make the idea of a citizens track something inclusive, impactful and achievable. But we also want to kick the tires of some of these ideas. So as I hand over to Emrys to kind of chair us in some discussion, critical feedback is as welcome as kind of yes ands. And very much we're also working on this at pace and trying to be as inclusive and work in partnership with anyone who's interested in exploring this further. So we're not precious about holding these ideas. We're very much trying to enable and support and catalyse work together.